Well, today we're going to be making completely no-knead sourdough bread, loaf and rolls, and we've got our mix prepared into the food processor here. We're just showing you this. The recipe that we're using is written in the description, but I just want to show you the consistency that you're looking at for the first knead. This is going to be completely processed in the food processor, and traditionally if you put the full amount of water in that they say, you are going to end up with a very moist sticky dough, which would be fine if you were hand kneading, but in a food processor it would just ball too much and work its way up over the top of the dough hook. So you've got to reduce the amount of water slightly, and if you do find that the dough is just too liquidy, then don't be afraid to put a bit more flour in until you get a consistency that's going to actually benefit from the kneading dough, pushing it and tearing it and working it in the way that you can see this is. So we're going to knead this now in this machine for a full 15 minutes. So just a matter of putting the timer on, all the ingredients in, and then timing it for 15 minutes, and then cleaning it off the dough hook and letting it prove actually in this mixing bowl until it has risen to twice its volume. What you will quite often find is about 5 or 10 minutes into the kneading process, the dough starts to look much moister than it initially did, and it starts to work its way up and just sit on top of that dough hook. So if that's the case, and what we're going to do now is happen with this dough is put some extra flour into this mix. So we've stopped the process and put about an extra 20 grams of flour into this mix. So we'll just restart this now. What we want is for a clean mixing bowl. That's the consistency you're looking for, a completely nice clean sided bowl so that the dough's not sticking to that at all. And we should see this thicken up now over the next 5 minutes of kneading, and hopefully it will be worked far better than just going round and round on the dough hook. Well, we've now finished our kneading process, and you can see the consistency of this dough. It's falling away nicely off the hook. And just clean it a little bit. And what we're going to do is take the dough hook out of this mix. Just leave it into the base of this mixing bowl. You can see the consistency. It's not too sticky. Got a nice bit of elastic in it. Still not properly kneaded yet though. But what we're going to do is let that have its first proof now. So we'll just cover this with a clean tea towel. Wash the dough hook off so we're ready to go for the second knead. And we'll keep an eye on that to see how quickly it comes up with its proving. While we do that and wait for this to prove, we're just going to show you the two flours that we're using. 600 grams is just a strong plain white bread flour. We were actually using a local one from a local watermill lettering set. And 20% or 200 grams, that's a little, sorry, 20% isn't the right ratio, but we're using a malted crunchy whole grain flour, which gives these rolls a lovely texture and a gorgeous flavour. That malting really comes through with just 200 grams. So the total flour weight we've got in this mix is 800 grams, 600 plain white, 200 of the malted, and that we found gives a really good combination mix, as if you're eating a proper malted loaf. Well, this dough's now been rising for about 3.5 hours. We didn't set an exact timer, but I'm pretty happy with the rise on this. Nice and doughy. Got a good spring back on it, and it's more or less doubled in size. So what we're going to do now is just pop the dough hook back onto this mixer, and we're going to give it the second kneading, again entirely in the food processor. Let's pop that down and we'll just knock it on. That is thick dough, strain there a bit. But that we want again to clean the bowl out completely, and we will knead this for approximately 5 minutes, then come back and show you the consistency of the dough. Okay, well we're 5 minutes in now, and we're going to do a dough elasticity test just to see if this dough is anywhere near ready. I'm just going to grab a bit and pull it away from the dough hook, and you can see that's tearing. Still quite moist, but it's sticking nicely, but nowhere near ready yet, so that needs a lot more further kneading. So I'm going to give this another 5 minutes and we'll come back and retest it. Well, she's had another 5 minutes now, and let's have a look, see how this dough's doing. Just just start to work a bit apart. You can see it's nice and elastic and it's opening up nicely. I'm happy with that. I don't want to dry it out any further than that. So what we're going to do now is get this off the dough hook and onto a floured breadboard. Okay, so here's our dough. 800 grams of flour in this, and that's enough to make a full-size sourdough loaf. And we're going to make 8 sourdough buns with it. So we want to divide this in half. Okay, and the half that we're going to make the loaf in, what I've got here is a cling film lined Pyrex bowl, which we've floured quite heavily. And our 400 grams of dough mix goes into that for its second rising, and that will just be put aside. And then the remaining dough we're going to make into rolls. So we want to divide this into 8 portions. So half, half, half. And basically you want to make these equal portion sizes. Very sticky this. But you see how nicely it peels off the knife. Okay, so we've got 8 equal sort of portions there. And we're just going to roughly form these. You don't have to be precise with these. There's no need to get them round or square. What we found with these when we first did it is they all merge into a roll of 4 on each side, and then you can just tear them apart. So we're just forming them roughly into squares like that. That's all you need. And then again, what we're going to do is cook these onto a floured baking tray with some parchment. So just heavily flour that, and you're just placing these roughly in 2 rows. Just spread these out. There we go. So that's your 8 rolls. Just see how roughly I'm shaping those. I'm not worrying about them. They're going to rise quite considerably, double in size, and if they're touching each other at the end before you bake, it really doesn't matter. So those go to one side now to rise by twice their volume, and then we'll show you just before we're ready to go into the oven. Well, these buns have now been resting for about 2.5 to 3 hours. And I'm quite happy with the rise that we've got on these. Now I'm not going to score these or do anything further with them. We're going to cook them on this cold baking tray. The reason for that is we don't want them to have too tough a crust or harder crust, particularly on the bottom. With a normal sourdough loaf, part of the joy is that lovely crispy base that's cooked on the base of a really hot Aga. These are going to be different. We're going to cook them on this tray so they are going to have a skin, but they're not going to have a thick or hard crust. So these are now ready to go into the oven, and they are going to go into a bottom of a roasting oven for around 20 minutes. I've put a bit of steam into the top of the oven by putting a roasting tray in, and now we're ready to pop these in. So here we go, into the bottom of the Aga, close the door, and we'll see what those are like in around 20 minutes. Now the other half of the dough that we've got in a proving basin, here we go. It's been proving for exactly the same time as the buns. We've got quite a nice rise on this now. Good residual bounce on it. And I'm going to let this prove now for another 20 minutes while we bake the buns in the Aga. And then when they're ready to come out, we will add more steam into the top of the Aga, and we'll tip this out, score it straight onto the Aga paddle, so this can be placed into the base of the oven, straight onto the bottom of the roasting oven, and cooks for about 25 to 30 minutes. Okay, well the buns have now had 20 minutes in the Aga, and we think they're ready to come out. They're looking really good. Yeah, I think they're good to come out now. Bring them across. And what we're going to do is just slide these. Going to have to do this manually. Just 1 second. There we go. Slid them on their baking parchment onto a cooling tray, and we're just going to leave those now to cool until they're touch temperature. But you can see how they've melded together, but they will easily just tear apart when you're ready to use one. So they can either be frozen for use later in a full row of 4 buns as they cook, or you can individually freeze them just by breaking them apart. Right, and here we have the sourdough loaf that's just come out of the Aga after a 25-minute bake. It's got a nice base on it, nice and floury, good hard crust, and that's nice. Sounds very, very good. The rolls have now cooled. We're going to cut into these next and show you the finished article. Remember, these have had absolutely no hand kneading at all, completely made in a food processor. Right, so here's the cutting video for the loaf we've made this afternoon. This is a completely unkneaded sourdough, and you can see it's quite a nice open texture, good crust on it, nice and bouncy. For a part malted wholemeal loaf, I'm quite pleased with that. And the rolls, nice and crispy on the outside, well formed. They're going to freeze, and we'll just take those out 24 hours before we're ready to use them. Alright, so here we have the homemade sourdough, which is the no-knead recipe in the food processor. And we've also got the homemade Tabury jam, which is still warm, but look, it's got a perfect set on that now. It was just right. So let's see how it goes.
Just pop some butter on. It's so good straight out of the oven, you don't need to taste.
Still warm, this.
Still warm.
It hasn't completely cooled, but it's still cutting really well.
Gonna have a nice cup of tea in a minute with this.
That Tabury jam is just full of fruit.
It's the best thing to do with Taburys because they're so sour otherwise. They're not great just as a fruit, are they? But they're lovely
sharp.
As jam.
Got to let them really ripen if you're going to eat them as a dessert berry. There you go. The
Yum yum.
Proof is in the tasting, and this is absolutely delicious. Full on flavour raspberry.
Good.
Best thing to do with Taburys,
Oh my goodness.
jam them and have them on homemade crusty bread.